Welcome, everyone. My name is A Waitz, and it's my great pleasure to serve as a host for this MacVicar Day symposium, where we will introduce our four new MacVicars, as well as learn about inclusive pedagogies from a great set of speakers. And the overall outline for the day is I'm going to make a few comments to frame things, introduce the new MacVicars, and then each of our panelists will speak for a few minutes, then answer your questions, and we'll go through the panelists that way. We won't have a lot of time for questions and answers in between, but we'll have a little bit. But then at the end of all of the speakers' presentations, I'll have them come up in a panel session. You'll basically have two opportunities to ask questions of the speakers during that time, okay? I want to start by recognizing Victoria MacVicar, who's here. Victoria is Margaret MacVicar's sister. I also want to recognize Sue Kendra, who is Victoria's friend, who is here with us. And I want to thank the team from the registrar's office who not only are involved in putting together this day, but run the entire sort of MacVicar process and do it at a very high level of quality. So I'd like to recognize Piero Ciccone, Kathleen MacArthur, Jenna DiTullio, and Mary Callahan, who are all here. So let me now start, and I'm going to say a little something about each of our new MacVicars. But let me remind you first that the MacVicar Fellowship is the highest acknowledgement that we give for exceptional, sustained contributions to undergraduate teaching at MIT. So it's really, I think, one of the most special things that you can have happen to you in your life. And one of the great things that I get to do in this new job I have is be the person who calls our new MacVicars up on the phone and tells them of this. And that's a really sort of special moment because it's also the case that despite all the wonderful things that are written about them in the nomination packages, it comes as a complete surprise to them, which is nice. And it's also one of the reasons that we only have two of the four new MacVicars here, because we keep the process actually very close hold until we are able to sort of announce it and share things with them. And inevitably, we have sometimes one or two people who are on travel then on the day of the MacVicar celebration. Nonetheless, I will be sharing something about all four of our new MacVicars. So let me start with David Otter. He is a professor and associate department head in economics. He's also a faculty research associate of the National Bureau of Economic Research and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Economic Perspectives. He has also served on the board of editors at the American Economic Journal, Applied Economics, and the Journal of Labor Economics. He is an advocate for improving the quality of undergraduate education. He's done so both by helping to bring instruction for foundational economics courses back into the domain of senior faculty in the department, and by encouraging greater attention to the quality of undergraduate instruction. He's known for his sense of humor, excellent pedagogical planning, and brilliant lecture notes. The following is a quote from a student. Though we often don't say it out loud, many academics would likely concede that the most brilliant researchers often are not the most effective teachers. I believe David is one of the rare scientists who can produce provocative and influential research and communicate effectively with students who have little or no background in microeconomics. So in his absence, let's give David a round of applause. The second person who is not in attendance is Chris Capizzola. He specializes in the political and cultural history of the United States from the late 19th century to the present. He graduated from Harvard College and completed his PhD at Columbia University in 2002. In 2009, he won the James A. and Ruth Leviton Award for Excellence in Teaching in the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. And during the 2011-2012 academic year, he served as an interim associate dean of the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. He's a strong advocate for the many educational opportunities that are so important for our students that happen outside of the classroom. He's coordinated the departmental FPOP program and is recognized for creating a positive learning environment. This is a quote from a faculty colleague. Chris takes it as his mission to promote the development of the whole person. He is as committed to the ethical and social maturation of our students as he is to their intellectual development. And now I'd like to invite Shankar Raman up to stand with me while I share a few words. Shankar's research focuses on late medieval and early modern literature and culture. He has an interesting academic trajectory. He earned a bachelor's in electrical engineering and computer science at MIT and a second bachelor's at MIT in the Department of Architecture. He then went on to receive his PhD in English literature with a minor in German from Stanford University. He's recognized within the classroom for being exceptionally well engaged with his class, communicating not only his willingness to hear their different perspectives, but actively and effectively encouraging them to express their views. These are quotes, first from a faculty colleague. Despite his intense, mad scientist-like charisma, the focus is always on the students, never him. And the second one is from a student. Shankar was once an MIT undergraduate himself, and he knows what it is to love both the sciences and the humanities, and to be a natural thinker in both. He showed me that it's possible to pursue my literary interests at MIT and to succeed, and he proved to me that I could bring together my technical and humanistic interests as an English scholar. Following Shankar's example, I decided to pursue a PhD in English literature. Congratulations. I'd now like to ask Rose Smith to join me. Hi, Rose. Merritt Rose Smith is the Leverett and William Cutton Professor of the History of Technology. His primary research and teaching interest is American industrialization, particularly the role of the military as a catalyst of technological change. He's the author or editor of 7 books, the most recent being Reconceptualizing the Industrial Revolution and Inventing America, A History of the United States. He's currently working on a volume about technology and its implications during the American Civil War. He's recognized for designing assignments so that students are always talking with and educating each other, and he's made MIT a more inclusive and collaborative environment. I have 2 quotes from students. The first, he had the ability to put students at ease, understand their struggles and other commitments, and yet push them to learn more than they ever thought possible. For that, I am forever grateful. I give him my highest recommendation. And another quote from a student, he has made MIT more inclusive and collaborative and is a beacon of a professor whose dedication to his practice and his students extends beyond the traditional standard. Ro, congratulations. Let me now turn to the subject of the symposium, and I'll start with a few words about Margaret MacVicar. This is a quote from Margaret that says, MIT's purpose is to direct the best minds toward inquiries and enterprises concerned with the human condition. Margaret was born in Hamilton, Ontario, and moved with her family to Flint, Michigan as a child. She received her bachelor's in 64 and her doctorate in 67 from MIT, and was a postdoc for 2 years at Cambridge University in England. As a 26-year-old junior faculty member, Margaret contributed to one of the most substantive academic innovations in MIT history when she created the Undergraduate Research Opportunities Program, which has been a standard bearer for MIT and copied the world around. She was acting on a suggestion of the famed inventor of instant photography, Edwin Land, who was at the time an institute professor at MIT, as well as the encouragement from senior faculty and administrators. She was the first recipient of the MIT Class of 1922 Career Development Award to support young faculty members of exceptional promise and unusual devotion to teaching. And in 1977, she received the Erwin Sizer Award for the most significant contribution to education at MIT. She also served as Dean of Undergraduate Education and was instrumental in revitalizing humanities, arts, and social sciences and revising the science distribution requirement during her tenure. And as I'll say a little bit later, she also had a very strong connection with Paul Gray. And one of the things that we will try and do in this symposium is bring together recognition of our faculty through the great work of Margaret MacVicar, and also connect that to Paul Gray's amazing contributions at MIT. So I'll say more about that in a moment. But let me start and frame the discussion here. I think it's fair to say, are we living up to the legacy of Margaret MacVicar? And I think in so many ways the answer would be an emphatic yes. But there are in some areas where we still need to do work. And this symposium is about one of those areas where we need to do work. And it's really focused on what are we doing to enable every student at MIT to sort of make the most of the opportunities that are here for them, and how are we diversifying the community here and supporting that community. And there's several reports, which I expect people have seen at various points in time, that make recommendations, ways that we can improve at MIT. And those reports have led to lots and lots of different responses. This is just a small sampling of the things that have happened as a result of these recent reports. And these have stretched everywhere from academic council to work by undergrads, to work by graduate students, to changes in our financial aid policies, to changes in our mental health and support services at MIT. So there's really a lot that's been happening. I think we should also, as people here who are very dedicated and interested in education, recognize the multiplying effect of academics. And we recently just had a marvelous example of this in the MIT and slavery class that I think just took such a wonderful approach to that sort of very challenging topic by doing it through a class. We have a class on the first year experience now where the students are engaged in trying to reimagine and transform the first year experience. And we have work by people like Karen Wilcox that look at how at MIT over a multi-decade history, the diversity of the classes on a class-by-class basis, and by that I mean subject-by-subject basis, has changed. And so there's a nice link up there, if you haven't looked at it, to look at some of the work that Karen has done in that regard. With all of that said, so a lot of wonderful work happening, there is more to do. This is a quote from Susan Silby from, I think, a month ago in the faculty newsletter. And it was a newsletter article commenting on the Me Too movement. But what it really said is that we have to look a lot deeper at the way we all behave within MIT and how we interact with one another. And that includes both outside the classroom and inside the classroom. And I wanted to share a little bit of data to maybe underscore a few of these points. So this is from the 2017 Quality of Life Survey. And what I've highlighted there is that about 40% of our students feel that the academic environment negatively impacts their mental and emotional well-being. So another data point, we have significant section of our population that says that the experience at MIT, this is when they're seniors and they're graduating, has contributed very little or none to developing self-esteem or self-confidence. And there's a gender difference in that that you can see. And finally, also from the 2016 senior survey, we asked, how often have you experienced small acts of bigotry or disrespect based upon your social identity? And we learned from students that 17% said a lot in their residence, 30% at least some. And I think perhaps directly relevant to some of the work that we will hear about today, in academic spaces, 27% reported a lot, and 31% at least some. Right? So that says, yeah, MIT is a marvelous place. We have a wonderfully diverse population, and we're doing a lot, but we have more that we can do. And I had a couple conversations shortly after I started with a few different people. One of them is a panelist, Christine Ortiz, where I started to hear people talking about inclusive pedagogies. And it's not something that I know a lot about. And I thought, well, this might be an opportunity both for me to learn about it and to have a wider audience of people learn about some of these things that are beginning to be tried in some of our classrooms, and perhaps we can do more in that regard. So that's sort of the basis for what you'll hear about today. Put simply, inclusive pedagogies are classroom practices and teaching strategies that include, engage, and support all students. So that's what you'll hear about. And I said that I wanted to tie this back to Paul Gray, since Paul Gray passed away this year, and there are a few very significant things that he did in his really exceptional life. And there's a few quotes I have here. It's hard to find a single quote about Paul Gray, as it is about Margaret MacVicar. One of the things that I can tell you is he was the key administration champion for her efforts to launch the Undergraduate Research Opportunities Program. He's also recognized as the person who made the most significant impact on the diversity of MIT. During his time as president, the number of female students doubled to about 35%, and the number of African American and Latino students tripled. And when he was later interviewed for an oral history, he said, quote, that may be the most important thing I did around here. And this is from a really exceptional career of contributions to MIT that stretches decades upon decades. So I think in a very nice way, the connections with Margaret MacVicar and with Paul Gray and with this topic tie together quite nicely. So I hope that you will appreciate the comments from each of our speakers today. So let me turn from there to introduce our first speaker to you. The speaker is Professor Catherine Drennan from chemistry. She herself is a 2015 MacVicar Fellow. And she's co-author of a book, What Every Teacher and Mentor Should Know, a guide to identifying and reducing stereotype threat to maximize student performance. And she will describe her efforts to help instructors recognize and address these threats in their classrooms and labs. Catherine.
Thank you, and I will take that. Excellent. Okay, so I like to start with my motivation for doing things, and I do this in the classroom too, that I feel like if I tell you why I'm interested in something and what my motivation is, it helps people appreciate what I'm doing. So my motivation for what I'm going to tell you about today started with a symposium that happened at Harvard University about diversity in the life sciences. And so MIT wanted to make sure we were well represented, And so they asked me to go and represent chemistry, and they said, and we're gonna give you homework. So before you show up, you have to do some homework. I thought that was awesome. My homework was to interview the undergrads, majors who were members of underrepresented groups in the chemistry department. And that year I discovered there were only 2, and that actually both had decided to leave the chemistry department. So it wasn't the best statistics going forward, but they agreed to talk to me. And actually this was incredibly useful because they were willing to sit down and tell me about their experiences, and we could talk about what might have been different. And one student in particular really thought about this. And one thing he said was that he never had any instructor that looked like him, but maybe that wasn't the biggest deal. And then he said that the thing that was probably the most important was that he never had a chemistry TA that had believed in him, believed that he was able to do this work. And that really surprised me. I had been working, teaching one of the intro chemistry classes, 511-1, for quite a number of years, and I'd worked with these amazing TAs. And so I was like, what did the TAs say? Like, what gave you the impression they didn't believe in you? And he really thought about it for a long time and said, it wasn't that they said anything. It was that they didn't say anything. And I thought about that a lot. I thought that probably this TA had the TAs had no idea the student was feeling so insecure, and that they had no idea that they should be saying anything. And I said, okay, we need to talk about these things. What can we do to bring this up, to have this discussion for everybody in the classroom to feel like they have a sense of belonging? So there are a couple of activities that I've done. One of them that I won't really have time to talk about today was this idea of I never saw someone who looked like me, and that is creating a series of short little chemistry videos that features different chemists that look like the full scope of what chemists look like, talking about their research and also their path to science. And these are available free online, and I also have a whole bunch of CDs that will be on the table outside. As you leave, you can grab one. So that is one of the things we did to try to help people see people who look like them. What I'm going to really focus on in my time today is talking about TA training and what we've done in the classroom to address these issues. So I developed a guide who said, and I have copies of this. It's just actually a short little booklet, and you can get a copy of this outside. It's also online. You can download this, have an electronic version from my website. And so we've used this training guide to train graduate student TAs, also sometimes faculty, new faculty, and also postdocs now in the chemistry department. And the training has been done in biology and in chemistry. And so that is one of the things that we've done. So I've developed the guide and run TA training with it, and also evaluated whether we could use technologies in the classroom that would also help with this issue, make the classroom a good place for all students. Okay, so let me just tell you, I don't have time to go through all the training. Let me tell you kind of some of the take-home messages of the training, and again, you can have a copy of the booklet outside. When I first started doing this training, I had students read some original literature about stereotype threat, and instead created this booklet about it. So the idea of stereotype threat, the perceived risk of confirming a negative stereotype. So for example, there's sort of this stereotype that I've heard about that women are less good at math. And so a woman in a classroom full of men may be worried about doing poorly, that she will reinforce that negative stereotype that women are not good at math. I show students data in this training that this stereotype threat can lead to underperformance, that everyone can be a victim of stereotype threat. It's not just about race, it's not just about gender, and that everyone has stereotypes. Some stereotypes are negative, some are positive, we all hold them, and there are things that we can do about it. For example, wise criticism delivered in such a way that the person receiving it feels like this person really does believe in them, believe that they can do a lot better. And it's a supportive and trustworthy environment. So MIT students, I think, They often feel like maybe this was a mistake that the admissions office made, and they're a horse, you know, they put on their zebra clothes, but they think someone's gonna figure out I'm not a zebra eventually. You can wear the geekiest t-shirts you can find, but someone might realize you're not really a geek. So we talk about this, and it's an interactive thing where we present data and then we have discussions and go back and forth. Okay, so how well does this work? So I have been collecting data on this for many years. Most of the data is from training that I've done of chemistry TAs. And so this is chemistry, data from chemistry graduate students. And so these are specifically chemistry graduate students that are gonna teach one of the big intro classes, 511-1. So we've asked students about whether they, and we have a lot of, and this was developed with Rudy Mitchell in the Teaching and Learning Laboratory, how they feel comfortable understanding diversity issues. You can see that, you know, the agreement is pretty dramatic. Many of them did not feel very comfortable before, felt much more comfortable after the training. You know, some of the recognizing stereotype threat, other things, unconscious bias. So from pretty low, 31% to 95%. And feeling comfortable with strategies or familiar with strategies about alleviating some of these issues in their recitation or classroom, 26% to almost 90%. So people were getting quite a bit out of the training, and not just about their familiarity and comfortableness with this, but their attitudes about these issues were changing as well. So we asked them, you know, how important is it to be an effective teacher to understand these things? And so we see an increase from 57 to 90% feeling like, actually, this is important stuff for teachers to know. And this was the one that made me actually the happiest, that many of our students felt that this was important to their lives too, not just being about a good teacher, but this was relevant to them. So from 56% feeling like this was relevant to their personal lives to 87%. So this training was working. We also wanted to see what the students felt, because remember, my motivation was that students that were from underrepresented groups didn't feel that the TA was kind of their TA, believed in them. So we collected data also on how the students perceived their TAs, and this is the data for all students. It's just from a 2-year period here. Asking about, did your TA want you to do well? How prepared were they? A whole bunch of questions about the TAs. Our TAs do very well. This is, you know, the score. 7 is the best here. So we get high ratings for our TAs in chemistry. And then we looked and we asked students to self-identify if they were a member of an underrepresented group. And so here's the data then, and you can compare the numbers between all students and students who are self-identified as members of underrepresented groups. And the numbers are slightly better for the URM population. That's probably not statistically significant. We can say that all students, regardless of race, and we also looked at gender, appreciated their TAs. And so I was very happy to see this. Okay, so the TAs were all psyched after this training, and they said, but what do I do during the semester? Like, how do I like let my students know that I'm supportive and I believe in them, and walk up and said, hey, you know, I see that you're a person of color. I just wanted to let you know I believe in you. Like this, they're like, I kind of get this. I see that it's important, but not quite sure what to do with this information. So we thought about what can we do that allowed the TAs to really become the cheerleaders, to really reach out to all of the students in their recitation. So I had this idea, and it involved using clickers, it involved using technology. And so at MIT, the best thing we can do is figure out how we can embrace technology to solve our problems. So many of you are probably familiar with clickers. Now you can have a clicker app on your iPhone, so maybe this is old school already, but there it is, there's the clicker. And so I had this idea that maybe by using this, we could develop this sense of team, this sense of belonging. So a clicker, you ask questions in class, people click in the answers. We were already doing this, but I wanted to see if we could use these in a different way that allowed us to build a sense of team. So the idea was Friday in class, we would have clicker competitions. So these classes are big. You might have 10 recitations. So recitations would compete against each other. And the winner on Friday, whichever recitation answered the most questions correctly, would get snacks at recitation next week. At the end of the year, we had playoffs, and the grand champion got a one-of-a-kind design t-shirt. Here we see 2 t-shirts that were in the running. We have single bond, double bond, James Bond. Or on the other side, we have an electron getting into an excited state using 511 joules of energy. So this allowed for the TAs to really be cheerleaders in their recitations, to get in there and say, maybe you don't have to win the whole thing, but Marcus, well, his recitation had the highest score in the last exam, but I know you guys are even better. So what can we do? We really need to learn our significant figures. Maybe we can get together on Thursday and go over material to do well on Friday. And so how can we do this? And I care about everyone in this recitation. I'm not doing my job until everybody is learning things. You can learn from each other. We're a team. We're recitation 3. Oh my goodness. All right. So how did this work? So we collected some data on this as well. And here the control is using clickers without competition, and the treatment is using clickers with the competition. And then we asked students a lot of questions. How did clickers affect ability to sort of think conceptually? 36% to 80, 36 is, that's, anyway, the 82% identify weaknesses, and sort of 50-50 with just regular clicker use to 82% with the competition, and the enjoyment increased tremendously as well. And here I'm wearing this winning t-shirt. It's a green lantern, but instead of the actual symbol, you have Q is greater than K, the equilibrium constant K, and the reaction quotient Q, because if you're the green lantern, you have the power of chemistry at your fingertips. Who cares what the equilibrium is? You can push it with your knowledge of chemistry in any direction you want. This is a powerful t-shirt. And so we got a lot of students, with their quotes about feeling uncomfortable with chemistry, nervous about being part of this course, but they didn't know they were going to be part of a team when they came in here. And so they had a sense of identity, a sense of belonging. And these students would walk up to me and introduce themselves, and they would tell me what recitation they were in, as if that just said everything there was to say about them. All right, so does this work other places? Just very briefly. People said, this is great, Kathy, but it will only work at MIT because you have competitive students there. So I reached out to Diane O'Dowd, who's a professor at UC Irvine, and said, try these clicker competitions in biology at a different kind of university. So she did. They have huge classes in many sections. So she was able to have a control and a treatment group where the only difference was the competitions. And she decided in the treatment group to put students with a little bit lower SAT scores. So here was the results. She found that the students, she looked at how much the students interacted in one class versus another. She found that the competitions really started study groups. It started people interacting and coming together. Again, this sort of sense of team worked very well there. And they also had higher grades in the session that had the clicker competition, about a third of a grade. And again, they had a little bit lower scores coming in. So she was really pleased by this result. Again, the only difference was whether there was a weekly competition or not. Okay, so in summary, we have videos and we have a booklet, both of which will be available outside, both of which also can be downloaded for free. We found that this training really does make a difference. The TAs reported that they felt much more comfortable teaching and they had a much better experience, and the students really appreciated their TAs. And we think these clicker competitions are a way that really allow the leaders of the recitation to give students a sense of team, a sense of belonging. And here is one of the winning t-shirts. This is Jay's recitation, and his students even came up with a flag. The recitation had a flag. Okay, so with that, here are all the people that were involved in this. As I've gone along, I'd be very happy to answer any questions.
That was super. Questions for Kathy?
using this on your colleagues as well as
The training.
the training.
Yeah. I was like, clicker competitions, come on, people. Yes, so actually we just had a chemistry department retreat in January where I ran the training, so yeah.
So I was a student in 511 last fall, and I did enjoy like the competition between recitation sections. But I do have a question. I was wondering if you looked at the effects of kind of like introducing this sense of competition into a class and seeing if there was any possible like negative side effects. We know at MIT we try to make things more collaborative, and so I was wondering if you looked into that.
You know, I don't have any data sort of on I think looking at that kind of thing, it's hard figuring out how to ask the right questions and other things like that. And you know, one thing that we did do in sort of breaking down all our different evaluations is to look at the effects by gender, by race, and other things, and see whether there was sort of, you know, in one group was, you know, felt like this, the treatment was much better, another group actually did not seem to like it. We saw, when we looked at clickers, we looked at a number of different sort of innovations that we did. We saw all the groups increased. Some of the things like showing videos in the class actually seemed like there was a bit more of an increase for women compared to men. And so that was sort of interesting. But we never saw a particular group go down. So that might be one way of getting at, is there a negative effect for someone that we're not appreciating? But other than that, it's hard. I think one thing I was interested in, if we saw sort of differences with the recitation that sort of never, you know, won a competition. Some of the TAs, though, created their own kind of competition where they said, I don't care if you won the whole thing, but you have to beat Marcus's recitation, because that's my roommate, and he's, you know, really driving me crazy about how good his recitation is. So if you beat that recitation, I will buy you treats. We had some other TAs that started baking. They had never baked before in their lives. So I thought one of the things I thought was really awesome is that some of the recitations got so engaged that they're like, well, we don't just want, you know, treats anymore. We have more demands. If we're going to win again, and they decided one of the TAs, his outfits were just too boring. He wore black jeans and black T-shirts every single day, and they're like, if we win again, we want you to wear orange. He ended up agreeing to bake them cakes, but he would not go so far as to wear different clothes.
Thank you so much for the presentation, and I'm absolutely now understanding why you're a MacVicar. You're amazing. I was wondering about something you started with. You started with talking to two underrepresented minority students who were in chemistry, who were then leaving chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if enrollment and retention in chemistry has changed in any way over time since you started.
There has been a change, actually, but there's a lot of factors involved. So I think, you know, without really kind of looking at that, that we have a lot more chemistry majors that have been part of underrepresented groups than we did at that time, much higher. And actually, at one point, someone said, hey, why do you think this has changed so much? It's like, well, I would like to think that I know the answer to that. But I think with different majors kind of coming up and other things, I really like doing research and education. It's so much fun, and I always learn something I'm not expecting when I ask questions. But doing the control is much harder than it is in your science laboratory. So we have seen a change. I would love to think that this is part of it, but I don't have the data to support that.
I'm a big fan of clickers, but not of internet-based clickers. What clicker technology do you use?
So these are these turning point clickers that are about this big. They're sort of credit card size. And at the time I was doing this, we actually, physics had first started, and they had one set of clickers originally that the students just really disliked, where they felt like their answers weren't getting clicked in. And so they had switched, and they were happier, and we thought, this is great. because most of the first semester freshman year, they already have their clicker from physics, so we don't have to ask them to buy something else. So we're using that. I think that there's been some switches since then. It would be great if everyone kind of got on the same page so students didn't have to have different ways of doing things. But this worked really well, actually. And I was able to purchase some with money I had from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, that if any student came to me and said, I can't afford this, that I would loan them a clicker. And actually, it was really cool. I often got returned to me more clickers than I had handed out. I think some people are like, I passed the class, here you go. That was, I had some extras, so I didn't want anything that I was doing to put any financial burden on anybody.
Kathy, thank you again. As I mentioned, we'll have an opportunity to talk to all of the speakers a second time when we have the panel discussion at the end. I'd now like to introduce Katrina LaCurts, who's a lecturer in electrical engineering and computer science. And she was part of the Teaching and Learning Laboratory's 2017 cohort on inclusive classrooms, where they worked specifically on this topic over a period of time. And she will describe her work to understand and democratize student participation in 6033. Katrina?
Disaster's happening already. Okay, thanks, Anne. So I'm here today to tell you a little bit about the work that I've done in 6033 to understand student participation. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about the class. 6033 is Computer Systems Engineering. It's a required class for all computer science majors, which means it's quite large. Right now we have 410 students. Most of them are juniors and seniors. And in some ways, 033 is a typical MIT class. We have 2 lectures a week. We have 2 recitations a week. But in a lot of other ways, 033 is pretty unique. And so 033 is a CIM class, which means it's a communications intensive class in the major. That means that most of our assignments are written or oral presentations. We really focus heavily on reading and writing in this class, and that's particularly distinct from other Core 6 classes where students are implementing things, building things. As a result of this, our recitation sections are pretty intense. They're taught largely by faculty or research scientists here. They're very much discussion-based. We have about 25 students in each recitation. And every recitation focuses around a different technical paper. So the students are meant to have read the paper beforehand. And in the class, we talk about it. How does it work? What do we like about it? What trade-offs did the designers of this system make? How would we redesign this system? And since these recitations are based so heavily around discussion, it is really important that we keep the students engaged in these recitations. And for the longest time, we had such trouble with this. So we would see, students weren't willing to answer questions, or the discussion was getting dominated by just 1 or 2 students, and that was putting other students off. We'd see students that weren't even reading the paper beforehand, so they certainly weren't ready to participate. And as a result of this, our instructors would, inevitably end up spending the first 15, 20, 25, 30 minutes lecturing about the paper that the students were supposed to read beforehand. And that just made things worse, right? The students were trained to expect a lecture at the start of these recitations, so they didn't even bother reading the paper beforehand. So no one was ready to discuss. So this is sort of where we were starting from. We're working on understanding participation, getting more engagement in these recitations specifically. So I started, reading a lot. I started working with the Teaching and Learning Lab. And I thought, I've been in these recitations. I've taught them myself. You can see that some students are uncomfortable with this. And so we are asking a lot of them, right? Volunteering an answer in front of your classmates is anxiety-inducing for a lot of students. But there are known techniques for helping them get more comfortable with these things. So things like having the students discuss things in small groups first, and then come back to the wider class. Techniques like think, pair, share, where students think first about the answer to themselves, then share with a friend, and then come back to the wider discussion. So that's just two examples. They both kind of rest on this idea that if you give students a more intimate environment in which to test their ideas, they'll get some reassurance and they'll be more comfortable going out to the broader class with these. And so all of these ideas, they rest under this umbrella of active learning, this form of learning where students are really more engaged with what they're doing in class. They're kind of engaged directly. So this became my new task. All right, not so much to understand participation, but get us doing more active learning in 033. Now, I will admit, I thought at this point, I was done, problem solved. I showed up at the staff meeting and I said, guys, I got it. Just do some active learning, we're good. This did not work. And I was so perplexed because I had told my instructors correctly that these activities would help increase participation. And my instructors were the ones complaining about the lack of participation. So it turns out you cannot just tell your instructors to do a thing they've never done ever and magically have it happen. So really, the real topic of this talk is, changing the way that we teach. Or from my point of view as the person in charge of this class, changing the way that other people teach, which turned out to be more difficult. All right, so let me tell you what I did. So we started doing this. 033 runs only in the springs, so we started doing this last spring. So the first thing, active learning was our mission in 033 that year. We started from day one, from the first staff meeting before the semester even got started. We didn't wait until the class settled down to start talking about this. We talked about it right away. I presented research to my instructors, so they would understand the potential benefits. They would understand where I'm coming from, right? We're all scientists. We all want to see the evidence that this is going to work before we try it out. For each recitation, in addition to just planning the technical content of the recitation, I also planned in activities for them. So I gave them ideas where, group work would work well here. Class-wide discussion or debate would work well here. You could try to have them act out this protocol. We do a lot of dramatic enactments in this class. And the reason I planned these things and I intentionally put multiple opportunities there because I knew that they would all be comfortable with different things. And I really wanted them to feel like they could pick and choose and try something that worked for them. And so throughout the semester, I started observing their recitations. So I would go and I would sit in on these. I would offer suggestions when things weren't well, tell them what things that I saw that worked really well. It can be hard as a teacher to know, exactly how things are being received. Occasionally, I would teach sections for them and let them observe me teach. Related to this, we reflected on this as a staff every single week. So every week in the staff meeting, we would spend time talking about, what went well. It turned out my instructors all had these amazing ideas about how to teach so many different things. And to them, it was just normal. So having this time where we could talk about what was going well really helped disseminate those ideas throughout the course, which has this huge staff. And it also gave us a space where people started feeling comfortable coming in and saying, I tried this last week and it didn't work as well. What do you think I could change about it? And that has been, super valuable. So whenever I talk about this, people want to know, did it work? And typically what they want to hear is, are the students' exams grades getting better? I don't personally think that is the right question. There are areas where grades have improved. For instance, we grade pretty heavily on participation. We always have. And indeed, we are seeing students earn higher grades for participation. I feel pretty comfortable interpreting that as a good thing, right? Students are engaging more. Another thing that we've gained from this experience in terms of grading, though, is really a better understanding of what it means to participate. I don't know if you've ever assigned participation grades in class, but it's a very nebulous thing. For a long time for us, it kind of meant, well, when we ask you a question, do you answer? But now it means, are they coming to class prepared? Are they engaging in group work? Are they listening to other students when other students say things? Are they participating in these discussions? So and by kind of firming that idea up for this, we're a lot clearer about how we assign that grade. Students are a lot less anxious about earning that grade They know that if they come prepared and ready to work, they're good to go. We've sort of set that standard for them. We've also done surveys. So we did surveys of the students last year. And in all of the students, the surveys that we did, the students reported feeling quite comfortable with these activities. Even right from the start, they were kind of down with this. In our final survey, we saw overwhelmingly that students thought that these various activities improved their engagement in the class. And so there are quantitative ways in which we've seen things get better. And those are all good, but I don't think that they capture what has been so great about this for us in this class. So I spoke to a few of my instructors who have been with me for a number of years now. So they've taught this class in the pre-active learning days, which we now call the dark times. So I have a few quotes. So from the first instructor, I think the students actually understand the algorithms better. In particular, if we're acting something out, we do a lot of acting out. If we're acting something out, it gives them a visceral experience of the finer points and edge conditions. It's really easy to slide over things if one reads a paper quickly, and we're asking them to read a lot. From a second instructor, I think that it's much better when there are pairs discussing a solution or when we're doing a game. People are more likely to notice a flaw in something that I've said or in someone else's answer, and they ask better questions. Plus, I think it's reassuring either to find out that a classmate is just as confused or to find out that a classmate knows a ton about the subject. And then from a third instructor, I sort of thought this was the best one for us. I think that the students are more engaged because they're asked to be more active participants. There's a greater sense of camaraderie between them because of their interactions. So not only are we seeing students understand the details of these systems better, this camaraderie has been huge for us. Like I said, this is an enormous class. Since we started doing it, they're kind of buying into it more. I get fewer complaints from students just across the board. We are seeing them be more successful in their team projects. We have a semester-long team project. We have fewer complaints from that. We are seeing them be more engaged in lecture and in tutorial, which is part of the communications component of this class, even though our active learning push was really focused on these recitations. So this whole thing, it's been beneficial for the students, but it has been beneficial for the staff as well. I will admit, this was a hard sell at first. Active learning is a lot of work for everybody. It was a lot of work for me. It's a lot of work for my staff. It takes a lot of planning, and it is a nerve-wracking way to teach. If you've never done this before, you have to let go a little bit of control of the classroom. But now, as one of my instructors put it, there's a modest amount of competition among the recitation instructors to work out schemes and games. So it feels like there's both a reward for applying myself, but there's also less need for perfection. It's helped that we're encouraging active learning as an approach because it makes it feel like less of a risk for me to try some new unconventional approach that occurs to me. And watching this happen has been really just a highlight for me as a person in charge of this course. So at the end of last semester, or the end of last spring, which again is when we were starting to implement this, my instructors had this email thread going about one of the final recitations. And so this recitation centered around a system called DNSSEC. So DNSSEC deals with security, and it prevents certain types of attacks on a system called DNS. DNSSEC stands for Secure DNS. So now you all will leave with some computer science knowledge. And so, I had planned this recitation. I had given them some ideas, and this first instructor emails everybody and saying that they had had groups draw diagrams of their attacks on the board in parallel. And then they had them talk through each diagram with the students explaining the problems and approaches. The instructor noted that they engaged, they laughed, they collaborated, and they learned more about how to design figures to tell the story they wanted to tell. I thought, this is so great. I did not plan that one. This is so exciting. And then there was a second email from a different instructor. They said that they had had a group of students work out how DNS, the original system, would work for a particular scenario. 2 additional groups joined the first group, working through how different attacks would affect that scenario. And then a 4th group acted out DNSSEC to explain how DNSSEC would prevent such attacks. That's so awesome, a whole other idea from a different instructor. And then we get to the 3rd email in this chain, which I could not figure out a way to summarize, so I'm going to quote directly. In my recitation, we had a marriage proposal that went bad when a romantic rival launched an attack to destroy the relationship. A second group used a different attack to induce peasants to send their taxes to a scammer. All of these attacks were then prevented by the use of DNSSEC. After each play, we did a replay with deep structure analysis that made the analogy between the play and DNS explicit. Overall, a pretty fun recitation. And so this was such a highlight for me last year. And I will tell you now, so 033 is running again this spring, I get one of these threads every week with these crazy and wonderful ideas that my instructors are coming up with. And so, to kind of sum up, I hope that this has come through in the talk. It has been a ton of work to make active learning happen in this course. It's been a lot of work for all of it, but it is so much more fun now. It's fun to run this class. It's fun for me to teach the lectures. It's fun for my recitation instructors and the TAs. And I believe that the amount of enjoyment we get out of teaching this class also comes through for the students. And I think in addition to all of the active learning, that's something that has really helped them sort of buy into this idea, feel more comfortable in the classroom and really make this work for them. So that's it. I'm happy to take questions.
I have a question for you. I think it's great that you're talking about participation because, again, that kind of gets into the notion of inclusiveness. However, I would argue that I haven't heard you talk too much about outside the classroom because, as you know, that's usually where a lot of the breakdown happens, where there's not as much availability for lecturers such as yourself. So I also wonder how much this has translated, your experiment with 6033. How much has that translated outside the classroom? Because really, that's where the real participation matters, as opposed to where it resonates in the classroom.
Right. So, I don't have any data on that. Like I said, the metric of getting fewer complaints, we're seeing students being just sort of happier with the course and so more willing to come to us when they do have problems. More comfortable emailing their recitation instructor or talking to them outside of class. Since the recitation sections are small, that's, despite me being in charge and up there lecturing, that's really their instructor. And so we're seeing students appearing to be more comfortable going to that person, talking about things that aren't going well. But there's everything, I'm sure, there's room for improvement in, making sure that students are feeling comfortable in office hours and things like that. So yeah, there's always room for improvement.
So the instructors that you're teaching here happen to be faculty,
Yeah.
mostly,
Mm-hmm.
who don't do this course all the time. They teach something else in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you've seen any effects where they've gone back to their fall course and said, maybe I'll teach this a different way now.
I have not asked, and now I'm going to ask on Monday. I also would love to know. I have definitely seen them get way more comfortable with this idea. As you know, Rob, I have some that will come back every year, and even the instructors that were sort of the most resistant to this now are totally on board. Some of our newer instructors this year actually have brought in active learning stuff that they've already done, so that was really exciting to see. But yeah, I would love to know how it's infiltrating our entire department, hopefully well.
If I could just, your first title about democratizing student participation,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that's how you went into this,
Mm-hmm.
that idea, but could you talk a little bit about sort of the idea about who participates and who doesn't participate and how that might change?
Yeah, so one of the things that we had observed, I think this will answer your question, but tell me if not. One of the things that we observed is definitely, the class being dominated by typically white, typically male students who came in with a lot of computer science knowledge already. And they were there. This is a really, 033 is this exceptionally broad class. We teach all of computer systems, which is kind of 4 components, and normally in most schools you'd take a class on just one of those things. So you get a really wide variety of backgrounds, and we would see these discussions just get dominated, and you can almost visually see the other students just shrink back. And so we had tried doing things like, okay, well, how do you call on people on this side of the classroom? These kind of things. It just wasn't working. Now we are seeing that that largely doesn't happen for us. I don't want to say that it's totally, gone, but that used to be a thing that we were talking about every staff meeting. I got these 2 students that are just talking all the time and I can't get them to shut up, but I don't want to discourage them. That's just not a problem for us anymore. Partly, again, because we've stressed so much this idea of group work, discussions, all of these things. The students are really buying into it more. There are always a few that are still very shy. And, we've also thought about that. Like, for students who are just uncomfortable with this, how can we make sure there are still opportunities for them to participate? So, for instance, if they're going into a class and they're clearly prepared, they're clearly listening, they are participating in their group work, but they're not as comfortable in these broader discussions, can we make sure that that's still okay for them? And this has really been helpful with that, because before, when we were considering participation, it's just when I call on you, you answer a question. That's not as good.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Let me introduce our next speaker, or pair of speakers, Eric Klopfer and Meredith Thompson. They will describe inclusive teaching practices through both modeling and activity, including online exercises, and I think they may get us engaged in one of those, which should be fun. The other thing I'd like to do is just use it as an opportunity to highlight the role of of our teaching and learning lab, not only through the inclusive pedagogies cohort, which Eric was also a part of, but just more broadly at MIT as sort of a real source for scholarship and knowledge about a whole variety of best practices in teaching and learning. So some of them are sitting right there, so thank you to them for that. And let me just ask Eric to come up. Thank you.
We're going to do a little bit of a team presentation here. So we teach the introductory courses in the teacher education program. The sort of little agenda for the next few minutes will be that I'll sort of open up, talk about part of what we do, and then Meredith will introduce some of what she does, and then there actually will be a participatory activity for everybody to do, and then I'll wrap up with some of the stuff we've done in online. So a little bit of background here. This is our logo for our program, the teacher education program. It is a homage to Seymour Papert and logo programming. We still do a lot of logo programming derivatives in our lab. We also do a lot of stuff with educational games. So there's the die there from like role-playing games. And so Meredith cleverly turned this into another hexagonal themed design here, which sort of points out some of the themes that we think about in inclusive pedagogies in our own classes. And we'll touch upon how each of these sort of wind up getting incorporated into our classes. Student voice and choice, multiple modalities, meaning lots of different media, different ways of engaging in the class, real-world connections for the students that we make for them, assessments, which is an important part of all of our classes, establishing expectations, and diverse inputs, meaning both from many different voices within the class, as well as external people, different kinds of teachers, different kinds of lecturers that wind up coming into the class. So a little bit about the teacher education program itself, so you have a sense of where all this sits. It actually lives in comparative media studies, and it has a little bit of legacy in course 11, where my previous appointment was. I recently moved to comparative media studies. And we teach 2 courses, introductory courses, the fall course, CMS 586, and the spring course, CMS 587. I teach the fall course, and Meredith teaches the spring course. Students can take, in addition to those 2 introductory courses, they can take a 3-course sequence during IAP and the spring and fall semesters, and a practicum, and wind up getting into a teaching license through MIT as well. It's a fairly lengthy endeavor for them, and we only have about a half a dozen students a year who wind up doing that. But our introductory courses, they're Haas CIH courses, so those are actually oversubscribed many times over. We wind up having to filter students out to get down to the maximum that we can have in those courses. So there's a lot of student interest in those courses. We wind up getting, I'd say, an overrepresentation of underrepresented minorities and women in those classes. I'd say we're typically maybe about 60% women in those classes. and we have a very high representation of underrepresented minorities in those classes. The typical narrative that we get when we ask students about sort of why they took the class in many cases is, particularly for underrepresented minorities and many women, is like, I wasn't sort of expected to succeed in math and science, and I did, and I want to give back. I want to give back. I want to make sure more women get involved. I want to make sure more underrepresented minorities get involved. I want to make sure people from my community get involved. And so it's a really great narrative, and I think that's what we get a lot of our participants in our courses. So today I'll talk mostly about the fall course, Introduction to Education, which is 586. And Meredith will talk a little bit about the spring course, and then specifically about the ways that we wind up teaching inclusive pedagogies within those courses. So it's a little meta here. We'll talk about the ways that we incorporate in our own classes and the kinds of activities that we wind up doing to make sure our own students are prepared for inclusive pedagogies. The latter of which I should mention is in collaboration with the Teaching Systems Lab, Justin Reich's group, and our collaboration with the Woodrow Wilson Academy here at MIT. Oops, that's there twice. So first, starting off with some of the connections to experiencing diversity and connections to practice. So one of the important parts of our courses, all of them, is that students spend time outside in the field in schools. So for many of the students that we experience, their experience in education is that they were surrounded by other people who did really well in math and science. Sometimes there are a lot of people who looked like them, but there's certainly people who acted like them in terms of their affinity for science and math, their ability to understand science and math. And one of our goals in getting them out there early is to make sure that they understand the diversity of students that are out there, the diversity of learning environments that are out there, the diversity of ways of teaching that are out there. And that's typically one of the really meaningful things that come back to us in reflections at the end of the semester, is what that means for them. They spend time out in the field, they're teaching, they're required to reflect on that, and we'll talk a little bit about those assignments, but they reflect on that in a diversity of ways. And we specifically call out their diversity of their experiences and trying to make sure that they recognize differences in the way that students are experiencing math and science. Many times their first experiences, they get out there and they're like, well, why aren't these students interested in math and science? Or why aren't they getting it? Maybe I just need to tell it louder or faster or slower or using some different voice. And so it's really about sort of recognizing the diversity of the ways that people learn as well. Planning for choice and voice. So it's a really important part of our classes that students have choices. People talk about this in different ways, and we know that a lot of the sort of like the ways that people think about that students have different kinds of learning abilities, but we don't think about that, but we certainly think about learning preferences that people have. And we want to make sure that people sort of feel comfortable coming from the places that they have those preferences. So student choice is really important in terms of the kinds of activities that you're involved in class, in terms of the kinds of assignments that you wind up doing in class, the ways that you participate in class. There's a lot of choice involved. Even though these classes aren't very big, those choices really matter. And then student voice as well. And that voice comes from the way that they participate online and the way they participate in class. We have many student-led activities where students are teaching, students are running small presentations within class, but that student voice is really important. It's also an important part of every conversation that we have as well. So I will say that I think in both classes, we spend very little time lecturing. Most of the time that we spend in class is student-driven activities that they wind up doing. Assessment, as I said, is really is part of that choice process that they have. So this is a CIH class. Both of them are CIH classes, which means that they need to write a fair amount within those classes. So there is a fair amount of writing that they need to be able to do. But that writing can come from activities that were group-based. That writing can come from activities that were individually based. Those writing can come from field experiences those students have. But in addition to the writing, they also have group-based design activities. In my class, for example, they have to design a game. They have lessons that they need to teach. They have presentations that they can make. In many cases, they actually have a choice in terms of the way that they present those different assignments. We have a lot of, in my own class, we have the final assignment even. We actually just changed it this year. We actually have many different dimensions to the class. We have curriculum that we cover in class. We have standards and policy that we cover in class. We have teaching methods that we cover in my class as well. And different students sort of align with different ones of those topics and actually think about different careers going in different directions based on those things. And so we actually have our final presentation they can choose, and then they actually choose within that. They create teams where they have to cover all those different things. So it really is a way of both giving individual strength and as well as collaboration across teams. Participation counts, we just heard this in the last talk. It's often a challenge to figure out a way you incorporate that. Again, our classes are fairly small, so it's a lot easier to think about that. But we do have that participation coming from participation in large groups, participation in small groups, and online participation. In both of our classes, there's an online component as well as a face-to-face component for what they're doing. So here's some of the things that they wind up doing. There's presentations, there's simulations, one of which you'll do today, and Meredith will talk more about those. There's written papers, there's games that they both play and design. In many cases, when they have a choice to read something or to create something, they have a choice of media around that. So you might be able to watch a video on something or have a reading on something or a podcast on something. And similarly, when you're presenting things in class, you may have a choice also of doing all those different media as well. So the last part that I'll talk about before I hand over to Meredith is student agency. So there's a lot of student-led activities in the class. It may sound a little bit hokey that we have current events as part of our class, but current events is an important part of our class. So it's about sort of bringing current issues in education into the classroom and making sure that the students are aware of those things. In many cases, those topics themselves deal with issues of inclusion. They might deal with school bullying. They might deal with bathrooms in schools and what genders have to attend bathrooms in schools. So all those issues wind up coming up in the class. And it's a way for students to bring up the topics that are interesting to them. Again, those also come with different media. So sometimes they bring in a current events article that's in the form of a video or a newspaper article, but they're bringing all those things into class. And role play is an important part. We wind up doing Committee of N in my class, which is a card game that one of my students developed for designing schools. But there's a lot more that happens in the spring semester, which I'll hand over to Meredith.
Thank you, Eric. One of the things that we do, and at the bottom is called Teacher Moments, and it's a simulation. One of the things we're trying to model in all of our teaching is how we think a good practices in terms of teaching generally, and using lots of different ways of communicating information. And I'll go from there. One of the things that we do is at the Teaching Systems Lab, we are interested in preparing the teachers for the future. And the thing about teaching is when you're actually in teaching school, in education school, you don't get a lot of times to practice. You might think you do, but in some ways, you're either observing, you're either at the back of the room, maybe you're working with small groups, and then you transition right to mentor teaching, and then you go and you have your classroom on your own. So one of the things we're thinking about is how can we give teachers and people training to be teachers lots of opportunities to practice. Imagine drills in soccer. You isolate specific things that you want to work on, and you're able to work on those and then put them together into larger pieces. So one of the things that we have is we've developed, Eric mentioned the Committee of N, and it's about, instead of just learning about the histories of school and learning about the philosophies of education, you are dealt cards, and you have to construct a school. And the philosophy of education may not be the same as the learning theory. And so you have to really get inside and understand it by using design principles to actually design a school. We have teacher moments, which is, all of you probably know, there's a time when you're in front of the classroom and something happens that you just don't expect. A piece of this is to be able to just breathe and be prepared for that. But what we actually do is we have students, before they come to class, do these simulations. One of our simulations is about a parent who contacts you right before school and says, I'd really like to talk to you. My son, Brian, I want to talk to you about Brian. And you sit down, and she says, I'm really concerned about Brian. What do you know about autism? And when you're sitting there and you're a teacher, or you're a new teacher, that can be a very intimidating question. So what do you do? And we talk about universal design for learning. We talk about what an IEP is. The students realize, I need to know this stuff. It's not just, yeah, I know that stuff. So one of the things that we've developed is this game called Swipe Right for CS. I covered this in looking at, we're at part of the Teaching Systems Lab is we are looking at different practice spaces. This is an example of one. Welcome to my class. This is what we did on Tuesday. And basically today we're going to talk about, if you are going to be a computer science teacher, code.org will bring you to a workshop. Imagine you're at a workshop, and they will say part of your job as a computer science teacher is to recruit a population of students in your class that reflects the same diversity in the school. It is part of your job. So what are you going to do? How are you going to convince a bunch of different people to actively come to your classroom? So one of the things we want you to do is we want you to get out your phone, type in this URL, and I'll keep it up there, but I want to make sure that we stay on time. And so this is called Swipe Right for Computer Science. This was designed by Kevin Robinson, as well as a UROP, Gabrielle Bellard, who's actually in my class now. She actually got a chance to present about this in class, student voice and choice, actually having students participate. And so the website stays up there. What you're going to do is you're going to have multiple student profiles and diverse characteristics. You'll see the first one is round one, meet some students. What you're going to be doing is you're going to have a profile. And then you're going to have an image of a student, a profile, and then at the bottom, you're going to have a rationale. Okay? So it's going to look like this. At the top, you have the student information. You have a little bit of very little background about it. Yes, we know, very little background. And then at the bottom, you have potential rationales. And you either have to, you look at the rationale, you think about the student, and you either swipe right, you think, yes, I'm going to use that. That's going to be one of my top choices to encourage the student to be in my class, or I don't know about that, swipe left. Okay? So we are going to give you, or who here needs more time to get there? You should try it. It's really fun.
If you don't have a phone with you, feel free to sort of look on with your neighbor. It's fine to just sort of read the profiles along with your neighbor.
Yep, and you can do this on a laptop too, if you bought a laptop. And so we're gonna get ready and just go ahead and do it. And actually, at the end, we're gonna, you'll see this, they're in, they need one more nudge, or I didn't get there yet. You'll see this option, and then we're gonna stop there. And I'll say a little bit more about kind of the how we used it in class. So I'm going to start the timer. How do I do that from here? Can you start the timer? You have to click on it. You can do 5 minutes. Try to get through the 6 profiles in 5 minutes. If anybody has any questions, raise your hand and I'll come and help you out. All right. Oh my goodness. That's a good one. Okay. So, whoops, sorry. Let's go to the next slide. Oh. Can you make it advance to the next? Okay. So how do we use this? Oops. Connect student strengths to academics. One of the things that we would do at this point is you would turn to your neighbor and you would talk a little bit about what do you think? Did you convince these students? What did you think of these different rationales? And who here found a rationale that just really didn't mix with the person, with the person? Okay, all right. And then you found a rationale for another one that really you wished you had had for that person. Okay, who that? Exactly. And so the point here is that the traditional, you're going to get a good job, you're going to make a lot of money, doesn't work for everybody. And that mismatch, feeling that mismatch is part of the experience. So we're thinking about connecting student strengths to academics, having diverse ways of convincing students to do things that are as diverse as your students themselves. Okay? We have assumptions about students. And in fact, what happens is these images are randomly associated with these profiles. So you have a jokester, a musician, somebody who's a maker, somebody who's a journalist or a striver, somebody who's a captain, and we randomly rotate through these, and so you basically get a chance to, we're going to do some research on unconscious bias, basically, when we go through this. And then some rationales don't fit, and we're learning and practicing diverse rationales for diverse students. Eventually, we're going to do research on this. Gabby actually did a presentation this Tuesday in class on her work on Swipe Right, which is, again, part of a Europe, kind of connecting it all together. So I'm going to hand this back to Eric, who's going to finish stuff
So
up.
the last thing I'll say is, we talked mostly about the work that we're doing in class, even though they do some of these activities with online tools. But as we're thinking about extending our classes to the rest of the world, we also have to think about these same ideas. And certainly as we look at the data that's coming back in many cases from our classes on edX, we're not getting the diversity that we necessarily would want to in many different dimensions. So it's something we've offered through my program. We've offered 4 different courses and multiple instances. So I think about a total of about 9 or 10 times we've offered online courses through MITx. They are sort of more humanities-oriented courses, so these are not sort of auto-graded problems, but in fact, they're mostly based on projects and presentations that people are doing and displaying to other people in that place. So one thing that's really important in doing that is that we need to sort of make sure that we establish a community that's in that online space, so that people respect each other, people give feedback to each other. And so an important part of that has been that everyone has an identity within that space. You're not anonymous. But when you post something in the forums, you have an identity. There's a profile that you can go to. And it doesn't have to have your picture. You could have an icon that's there. It's up to you to how do you want to present that identity. It's not tied necessarily back to a real world identity, but it's a fixed identity. And it's up to the person to how they do that. That identity does include all the other things that the person has posted. So if you want to see what the other people what that person has posted, you can go quickly find that. So that's a really a critical part to sort of having that, eliminating the trolls that we find in a lot of other internet forums. And we've had a lot of success with that. So nothing is anonymous, including, as I said, in the forums, but we also had peer grading that goes on. And then the peer grading is actually set up to be anonymous so you can give feedback to other people. We found in those cases when feedback was anonymous that people were overly critical and provided too little guidance in terms of the assignments they were giving. So we now do that all in an open forum. So all the feedback is openly done so that you know who's reviewing you. Really important, it turns out that white middle-aged men with gray beards are not underrepresented in academia. I don't want to have just my face being displayed in these courses. So all the courses, I'm the host for these courses. But because we're doing this online, we have a chance to bring in so many different faces. So we really bring in a really diverse community of speakers, presenters, evaluators. Within each course, there's dozens of these people. So we really want to have a difference of opinion, we want to have a difference of expertise, and we want to have a different diversity of backgrounds as well. And then similarly as we have in class, we also want to make sure we have a diversity of assignments so that when people present things within these online spaces, it's not just about everybody's writing a paper, but everybody is presenting an idea in some way. And someone might do that through a video, and someone else might do it through a PowerPoint presentation, someone else might do it through an essay or a podcast. And so each person has a way of presenting themselves in a unique way within that space. So I think it's just really important to think about the ways that we can translate these same lessons of inclusion to our online spaces as we do more and more of our work online and try to embrace a much larger and more diverse audience in who we're trying to attract to those courses. So this is just some of the stuff from those online courses, some of the faces that were there from people these are all people who have worked in our lab, but other people that we've gotten from outside, from other universities as well. So with that, I'll just sort of leave up our slide here about our dimensions of inclusion, and we're happy to take any questions in the remaining couple minutes.
Questions for Meredith and Eric?
Go ahead.
So when MIT students come in to take a class about teaching or education, what do they expect the class is going to be? What do they expect that they're actually going to do? Learn about theory, learn about John Dewey, actually learn pedagogy, or no idea?
So that's a really good question. I think a lot of the actual answer to that comes from they expect what they've heard from their peers. If you read the description of the catalog, it's going to give you very little information about that. It's mostly what they expect from their peers. It's funny, just this past semester, I've always thought, like, is my course too easy for MIT? Maybe it's not rigorous enough. And it came up in conversation on the last day of class when we asked for feedback. And the students say, no. If you want an easy Haas class, everybody knows not to choose this class. And so I felt that was good, that we're sort of rigorous in what we do in the class. But I think through that same sort of network, the students have some idea of what they're doing in there. I will say, though, that because we cover multiple different dimensions, and there really is only, if you're interested in education, there's a pretty narrow pathway you have to walk down. So we do get kids who are more interested in some of the sort of policy around schools. We get students who are more interested in some of the curriculum development, so they're not actually interested in being classroom teachers. And then we get people who are interested in teaching. And because we're this narrow pathway, we try to sort of embrace all of those different kinds of interests, both within the classes and within the Haas concentration itself.
Also wonder, again, and I think it kind of goes back to the last question I had, and the question I had for your previous presenter. I was just translating to stuff such as retention and even admissions, because I think the issue is, for instance, of the 88 black graduate students that I know, I already know 2 of them that are great grades on the ball outside the classroom, kind of like Gabrielle Valley, and yet they're not getting into the PhD program because they're just not really supported. And it goes back to that idea of how there are these beautiful games that are happening, but it's not really a lot about developing the actual future of those particular individuals. So I was wondering, what role does this play in retention? Are you guys even focusing on that, or is it just class? I know it's a tough question.
So, I mean, I'll say as far as admissions go, I think it has very little to do with admissions. Most people who want to do education haven't identified if MIT is the place they want to go. Most of the students who we get who are interested in education wind up coming in, and we're getting students from all the different majors at MIT, all the different courses. Typically, the story is you're in your junior or senior year, you did an internship last summer in your domain, you realize that wasn't the thing you really loved, but then you volunteered in a school and you realize that's where your passion was, and you wanted to find some place at MIT that sort of recognized that, and then you find our program. So it's not typically through admissions that people see us. I'd say in the nearly 20 years I've been here, I could count on one hand the people who sort of said, like, I came to MIT, I want to be a teacher, I found you on my first day of my freshman year, because this is the program I want to do. It's typically people who find it much later on. But I will say that, so in terms of retention, I think it does play a role. It's those students who I just described who find that the place that they thought they fit in MIT is not the place they actually want to be. And the fact that we have a program like this that sort of recognizes that diverse set of interests and finds a home for them, and we actually often call I call my classes sometimes Teachers Anonymous. One of the issues is that students don't want to tell their parents that they just spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars sending them to MIT so they could be a teacher and make minimum wage.
That's minimum wage. Myth.
So we sort of, it becomes a support group where we support the students and the students support each other in that choice. And I think that's a really important role that the program serves.
I'd actually like to speak to that a little bit. A piece of it is getting these MIT students who want to give back. They're going out to Prospect Hill Academy, they're going out to CCSC. They are fabulous role models for these students. And they realize how important education is, how important it is to be that role model and to give back. And we're giving them that opportunity to do that. And so in many ways, I think that maybe not necessarily, we're not attracting a ton of students to MIT just because they heard Eric Klopfer is here, and because we have these great courses, but we're actually helping to give back to the community that we're in.
Yeah, that's what I was asking. Does it translate outside of the classroom? Yeah.
Yes, that absolutely. Now, do we measure that? Do we do? We have a very strong relationship with the teachers, and so teachers have our students back all the time, and they definitely, having those role models in the classroom is some of the most important thing you can do to have students think about STEM majors and think about coming to places like MIT.
Meredith, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks so much.
I will introduce our last speaker. Christine Ortiz is a professor of materials science and engineering, and also a former dean of graduate education here at MIT. And she will describe the use of inclusive pedagogies in a new inquiry-based course she has developed called Materials, Societal Impact, and Social Innovation. Christine?
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you so much. So I think I would love to reiterate what Ian said about thinking about ways to enable all students in all facets of their many aspects of identity to succeed and get to the sort of highest levels of learning in our classrooms. And so I sort of took up the question of what it would look like, hypothetically, if we were to embed inclusion from start to end at every step of the process of learning. And I've focused on research as pedagogy or inquiry, and as a form of active learning. And so I've converted all my classes into inquiry-based, but really research-based learning, where the goal is really to sort of And of course, so it's basically taking two bodies of literature, course-based undergraduate research, of which there's quite a bit, in particular in the field of biology, and the scholarly work that's been done in the field of equity, and trying to bring those two together where you embed this pretty much from zero to end at every stage of the process. And this is very much a work in progress. And so I would be happy to continue. We're continuing to develop and evolve it as we go on. And of course, my background comes from being very inspired by the work at MIT on inclusive mentoring in graduate education. And so I take that internally with me and from my office before. And so that's impacted me greatly, and also, so it's transitioned a bit into the undergraduate space. So all the classes I've been teaching are in the undergraduate space. And so, research is pedagogy. We disaggregate into 8 steps from the beginning of the semester to the end, where we disaggregate the process of inquiry. And again, this is applicable to project-based learning. From the beginning to the end. And our goal is to get the students through that process and support them through that whole process. The structure of the class this past fall was they do a research project, and then we have also in classroom sessions that are a variety of mechanisms, small group, et cetera. And they have deliverables at every stage of this process, and this inquiry process is meant to actually, and the deliverables, to integrate both research as pedagogy and inclusion and equity, and also social impact and social innovation. Of course, there's overlap between social perspective, social innovation, and inclusion and equity. So we start from the beginning and we say, can we actually, aside from thinking about inclusive teaching, inclusive dialogue, inclusive mentoring, the literature there, we ask the question, how can we fundamentally modify the process of inquiry itself? And that is inclusive of the scientific method and engineering design itself. Because as we know, the lack of embeddedness, I would say, or perspective or reflection of inclusion in that process has led to enormous propagation of inequality in science and technology itself. And so we've been really thinking about, beyond mechanisms of teaching, as a form of pedagogy, how do we fundamentally change this process itself? And I would say that I've drawn a lot from both of these bodies of literature, but in particular, an MIT alum who actually happens to have the same name as me, which is very strange. That is not me. That's Dr. C.M. Ortiz, who was a student here, actually, when I was first an assistant professor here, and then went on to Harvard Graduate School of Education. And she co-taught with me this past fall, and I would recommend, ironic, so I would recommend this wonderful paper as well as her dissertation if you get a chance to read it. And what she did was she modified the process of design thinking around equity. And so I saw lots and lots of parallels of this. And there's been lots of great work that has emerged in the area of design, obviously, and bias and inequity and inequality. And so and again, this is very much a work in progress, but basically what we've done is, so the form of the class was, they're in teams that are doing research projects. And we guide them through that whole process. Of course, it's a nonlinear, recursive dialogue process, so they're feedback loops. And we embed principles throughout every stage of the process. So we start the class, and instead of just throwing all of the students into teams, we spend quite a bit of time of foundational work on inclusive dialogue and inclusive collaboration, right? So before they even get a chance to do any work together, we set this foundation for them. Not only the literature on it, but we do some exercises for them to start to really exercise all of these principles of inclusive dialogue. And there's some great work on that. And so we start right from the beginning, thinking about how disciplinary terminology can be exclusive, right? Thinking about how just the fact of using certain words can be exclusive. And we move on to thinking about when you're doing a literature review, right? The first step in any research project is doing a critical review of the literature. We embed things like historical context, not just the standard historical context, but getting at the real sort of invisible history around ethics, around cultural diversity, alternative knowledge systems, bias, oppression, power, privilege, and it's quite a challenge. I mean, our whole idea was to take these students, in my case, these are all materials and manufacturing projects, and there's a disciplinary framework around that, right? And so our challenge was, how do we take these projects which are pushing the boundaries of the field and the frontiers of the field and really connect that to social issues, social justice, bias, oppression, power. And that is not a simple thing to do. And that's the role that we can't just sort of go in and talk about and have discussions and show literature about these things. We actually embed it in the deliverables, in the project deliverables that they have to do. So they have to actually take it, internalize it, and then utilize it in the deliverables at every stage. And so then you can see the other things. So then when they're defining a question, there's great work on this. When you're defining your scientific question or you're defining your engineering design, right? There's a whole process that you can go through to do checks on bias, understanding human considerations, thinking about root cause analysis, interdisciplinary beyond the actual technical problem. And so again, drawing a lot on the work of the other Katrina Ortiz in defining, just even spending the amount, we spend quite a bit of time just even thinking about how to define your research question. And you can go through each of these and see, right? So then when you're developing your research plan, thinking about ecosystem, thinking about stakeholders at the margins, access, inclusion, social impact, your method selection, unintended consequences. There's concepts around equity and inclusion in all of these things. Tacit knowledge, lab culture, feedback, continuing on, we do social impact analysis, social return on investment, unintended consequences. And so what we've done is in the final deliverable, which the expectation is that it is a full scholarly journal, almost like a journal article, is that there's also a strand around equity and inclusion and social impact, so it's 50-50 in the end. And the other thing, you see these little loops, is we do this all in a blended format, so we use a blended platform whereby they have shared digital spaces. And this whole idea of our research is pedagogy, is that you're continuously giving the students feedback. So in that formative stages of when the students are forming in their teams and we're trying to get them to understand inclusion and work together in an inclusive way, and of course we talk about this setting high expectations, and I'm going to support you to get to these high expectations. So I say to the students, you can submit the idea is that, obviously you learn through feedback and revision in research and inquiry, right? And we have this digital platform where we can go in and do feedback and revision. And so I said, you can submit your deliverables as many times as you want. I'm going to go in and give you feedback until you all get an A. And I think all of you can get to this point where you can, it's a lot of work. But the first point is, I said, okay, here's what the final deliverable looks like. And it's scary, right? It looks like it's, the expectations are up here, but I'm like, I'm going to get every one of you to that point if I have to go in and help you revise and revise and revise. And I said, that's how you learn, right? Through feedback and revision, right? This is a good thing, right? And that it's not reflective on you. So we go through teaching the students how learning happens. We did sessions on growth mindset. We do sessions on diverse teams, on all kinds of different things embedded all the way throughout. And so we did 3 assessments. In particular, we do direct learning assessments that come directly from the platform, which are the embedded deliverables. We did a self-reported student learning assessment on key learning objectives at each stage of the process. And so we've gotten some really great data on this as well. So again, it's a framework that's in process, but I think the fundamental question that we ask is how can we embed these concepts at every stage of what the students are learning? it was really a joy to teach this last semester, and getting to know the students and seeing them make their way through this whole trajectory. So thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions.
Maybe I can lead with a question that I already know the answer to, but I think it's an interesting one, which is how did the students respond to it?
Yeah, so it's definitely, the perception was that it's a lot of work because it's a project-based class and it's additional to other classes. I think that it was really interesting, the intensity of the discussions that we had in the classes, and this combination of trying to do both sort of, high-end research and bringing issues of social justice in were very moving for a lot of the students, I would say. And, we had just all of the classes were roundtable sort of discussions. And, I'm constantly amazed and impressed by the depth of thoughtfulness, of the students. And I would say I had just some of the most wonderful discussions with them. So, yeah. And many of them have kept in touch with me even this semester, and have told me about how they're using it now going forward in their career. Some of the discussions we had around, just being thoughtful about also their own future career and what they want to contribute to the world, and the tool set for making those decisions, right? Like a lot of them we had a couple seniors, having to make those decisions about what they want to do with their life. So that was really rewarding.
Great.
Yeah, Admir. Yeah, thanks.
You mentioned blended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So last summer, we spent a lot of time thinking about what platform we wanted to use for inquiry-based learning. We looked at K through 12, a lot of K through 12 platforms, but they weren't really, I would say, because these were every range from junior, senior, even grad students took the class, so it was a little bit difficult. So what we did is we actually took Lab Archives, which is the platform that MIT has a subscription to, and they actually have an instructional model that we modified. And so it's pretty much, it was great. There was pieces that we would like in it, more of collaborative pieces, but it had really nice shared digital lab notebook spaces, and it allowed us to scaffold this whole structure. It was perfect as an LMS. It was great. And so the other thing is we had, so it was, overall, it let us do the most basic things. Like most platforms on the collaboration side, there's a whole bunch of stuff I would have wanted. I'm talking to them about that, but so it let us do the most basic kind of scaffolding. We have a subscription to it. Everyone can use it. Lab Archives.
Question?
So I'm just curious if you can hear a couple of examples of like a student project. And
Sure.
How it evolved from like, day one, I think I'm designing material to cells, yada yada, but then all of a sudden I take your class and did you see like drastic change?
Yeah, so one project, which was a great one we did with Form Labs, which is a 3D printing company, additive manufacturing company. And so we did it together and we set it up in my lab. And what the students did was they designed, a lot of the features that we studied were either sort of health related, or this one was sustainability and environmental impacts related. So they designed so they took printed materials and designed a process to recycle. It was a recycling project. And then re-embed the materials into the neat resin to print it. And they were able to do it. And so they were able to not only, create some really cool particle reinforced composites, of which they could do all kinds of material science with, both theoretically and and experimentally, but they really had a great platform of which to think about sustainability and recycling of materials as a prototype for additive manufacturing, right? And so 50% of them, all the students did stakeholder interviews, which was very different for our students in material science. And so, yeah, so they did map the ecosystem. They thought about the social impacts in different markets. So that was a really cool project. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure, thanks.
Just paying attention to the time, we were scheduled to go until 4 o'clock, and it's about 5 minutes till 4 o'clock. And what I'm going to propose is, instead of having a panel discussion, that since we're set up for 4 o'clock, I believe, in the Chipman room for a reception, that I'm going to propose that we adjourn to that reception, and that we can sort of then all sort of ask people questions there in a more informal environment, if that's okay, since we did have a lot of great questions, which is one of the reasons that we stretched a little long on the agenda. But so what I'll do first, before formally closing, is just recognize our speakers again. So Meredith and Eric and Katrina and Christine and Kathy, just thank you for really an exceptional set of things. And thank you for just trying new things too. I mean, it's great. You know, I mean, it's hard, you know, to do new things rather than just show up and do what you've done. And it's just wonderful to see the impacts of the work. So thank you. And with that, I will again just acknowledge what a wonderful day it is to add 4 new MacVicar Fellows to our rosters of MacVicar Fellows at MIT. So congratulations again to the 2 who are here. And I encourage everyone to join us just 2 doors down in 6104, I believe it is, for refreshments. Okay? Thank you.